Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sciarretta. Come on in and hang out. In this episode, I sat down with my brother, Peter Sciarretta. Pete's been on the show before, but I wanted to have a different type of conversation because in previous conversations, we spoke about education and his 30-year career as a teacher. But in this episode, we transitioned to him talking about life coaching, which is the next step in his professional journey, about building a life coaching practice, about what life coaching is, what it's not, what some of the challenges are, what some of the opportunities are, etc. We had a wide-ranging and very fun conversation, and I hope that listeners enjoy this conversation as much as I did sitting down with my brother. Welcome, Pete. Thanks for spending a little time this afternoon, and thanks for your flexibility with some of the tech stuff. So I want to, you've been on the podcast previously, and people who listen regularly kind of know that you had about a 30-year career in teaching. But what they might not know is that in the past year or so, you left teaching to become a life coach. And so can you start by telling us, first of all, what is life coaching? I mean, you go to a bookstore or you look on Amazon and the self-help section has hundreds and hundreds of books in it. And there's all these books about changing your life and it's a one thing, or change your life by being a Genghis Khan leader, or, just say F it, or, un-F yourself, like all this stuff. And so what is life coaching and why does it even matter?
It's a great question. So I think in the most accessible sense, life coaching is something that happens really all the time, right? Let's say, I don't know, doctors, life coach. They get you in a room, they talk to you about options you have for a loved one, perhaps for your own health, and they coach you through it. They give you options, they suggest things. When you go, in its most rudimentary form, you go into a library, which is kind of old school, but the librarian may coach you towards this section or that section, or perhaps these are the kind of books you want to read. Police officers do a lot of life coaching, right? Calming people down, telling them things they may or may not want to hear, but just kind of, okay, here we go. This is what we got to do. Cesar Millan is a life coach of sorts, right? Helping people, coaching them in how to behave so that their dogs work with them, not against them. School principals are a really good example of a life coach, also coaching parents, children. I understand you were really upset. Next time, this is what you need to do differently, so on and so forth. So I think life coaching can really show itself in many, many forms. Of course, that's sort of in the day-to-day application, but and I guess I should say that the difference with formalized life coaching is just that those bits of advice happen in a little bit more of a direct fashion in an office setting. And so the coaching about what to do, maybe how to think, so on and so forth, happens a little bit more directly. But we're constantly getting coached in life, right? Especially if you're a parent, you're coaching your children on how to maybe respond, think about something, so on and so forth. So that's a pretty overly simplified definition. But the reality is that life coaching has been around in many forms, in many disciplines for decades, centuries. And back in the day, life coaching really came from the wise, oftentimes elder in a community, maybe the medicine person, oftentimes a medicine man, sometimes a medicine woman, and life coaching happened there as well. So it's really been around for forever, in fact.
So if there are all these examples of coaches, whether formal or informal, it sounds like, as you described it, mostly informal, just de facto kind of people who are mentors or stand in at a certain point in someone's life and provide guidance. Why do we need a separate person called a life coach? And when did that really start to become a thing?
Yeah, those are good questions. So my favorite life coach actually is Brooke Castillo. And she's been life coaching for about 20 to 25 years. And um, she has something called the Life Coach School, and she formalized it. um, uh, I would say that the reason formalized life coaching is an important profession is because it's a little bit more, it's one step removed from a parent coaching a child. And just as we know, we can sometimes say something to our children that they may or may not listen to when it's told in a more formalized setting, perhaps by a school counselor, perhaps by a therapist, perhaps by a teacher. They listen a little bit differently, right? And so, because of that, um, putting it in a little bit more of a quote unquote clinical setting, where people are obviously paying for the coaching, they look at it, they view it a little bit differently. It's not the neighbor kind of across the fence saying something, but it's a little bit more formalized than that.
And so what's the preparation like to be a life coach? I mean, it sounds like your mentor has a life coaching school. That's certainly not the only one. I'd imagine there are life coaches who have no training. I'd imagine um, there are life coaches who've developed their own paradigms and their own methods, and um, perhaps like an Anthony Robbins was kind of or Tony Robbins, whatever his name is.
Both are correct.
Correct, depending on how friendly you are. I guess my question is, how does someone become a life coach? And then can you talk about how you became one?
Sure. So you're right. There are many schools of thought in terms of preparing individuals to become life coaches. Um, there are many schools. Most of them are online. Many of them are also in person, and they do all have different models that they use for educating, for training new life coaches. I think that the life coaches can choose many different things. Some are much more kind of positive based, like rah rah rah, almost cheerleader like. Um, and yeah, schools can be attended all over the place. Um, Unfortunately, there are really very few credentials needed to become a life coach. In other words, anyone can really call themselves a life coach and start marketing themselves accordingly and begin to see clients, etc. Um, and you mentioned my 30-year, almost 30-year work in education, and I actually attended a 3-year course specifically to become a life coach, and that was something that was incredibly helpful because there's a lot of work one needs to go through in order to recognize one's own shortcomings and areas of strength, etc., and then how to utilize that with clients in order to help and support them. Um, so yeah, and you also asked Dave if what specifically why I wanted to do this, or yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, after almost 3 decades of working with groups of individuals, I realized a lot of my work, especially with students in the elementary school setting, was with the parents, and that really required quite a bit of informalized life coaching, which I realize is what it was. And so I thought this is something I really enjoy, working with adults to support their children. So I'm going to go get trained, and then transfer some of those skills and that experience in that realm to more specific, direct life coaching with individual clients. And that's what I did, and it's been a fantastic transition. And I've really enjoyed it. I loved education, but I won't go back to it in that form. I'm going to stick with life coaching.
So, you bring up the formal training, and it's a little bit analogous to perhaps a therapist, although I think people probably use the therapy title loosely as well. There's probably, I know that there are certain licensing bodies for therapists, and then you could probably someone could just hang a shingle and call themselves a something therapist, a goat yoga therapist, or whatever the case may be. But for most therapists and mental health professionals, there are ethics that practitioners abide by, privacy and things like, letting clients know that you won't divulge things except if they're going to be a danger to themselves or others. Um, if you see your therapist or the therapist sees the client in public, they're not really supposed to acknowledge that they know them, those sorts of things, right? There's kind of a code. What exists in the area of life coaching for the protection of both of the client and the life coach?
Excellent question. So, I mean, when I see my clients in public, I usually offer to buy them a beer, which is
Nice.
probably against the ethical code. I'm
Yes.
just kidding. But
We're going to put that in the show notes, that there's a QR code scan for adult beverage.
so, actually, because of the informalized requirements for credentialing for life coaches, there really isn't that same level of ethics connected to life coaching. However, in order to maintain the competence of clients, right, life coaches do need to be mindful of that uh, you know area of of not disclosing what goes on in a life coaching session. I think there's two little kind of maybe tangential but probably informative points I'd like to make. One is that my focus is not to kind of analyze the past that people come in with and share. My focus is really to look at where the client currently is in their lives and what strategies to impart, to encourage them, to help them, to support them with, in order to move their lives from that current point forward. Where therapy is much more about what has occurred, how that has impacted you, so on and so forth. So it's a slightly different application, I guess. Um, and so if I were to see my clients out and about, I would certainly say hello, and that's okay. Um, but that's probably where it would stay, and we'd greet and go on our way. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking too about that. Well, you marked the line between life coaching and therapy in your mind.
Yep.
Does it ever happen that you're in a session with a client and they start to rely on you as a therapist and a chalice to deposit their deepest, darkest secrets in, and you got to be like, whoa, let's focus on some actionable steps, or do you let them go? And how does that
Yeah.
how does that dynamic work?
Excellent question. Yes, I have been in that situation, and I'll tell you, I don't have any firm um, guidelines for that in terms of my coaching practice. What I usually do is allow for some of that to happen, and then look at how that may be impacting my client, and then what we can do about that. Right? There usually wouldn't be too many interrogatives from my part following a sharing of something pretty deep and traumatizing, I would probably look at it from that moment and see how we can move forward. Again, it really depends on the client and how much they, are still sort of holding on to that they want to share. I will say that the majority of my clients also have therapists as well. And that is something that I really strongly encourage because of what I've shared in terms of, right, focusing on the past, looking at trauma, so on and so forth. Whereas my job is really to find how I can help someone move into the future.
Do you think that part of the rise of life coaching as a formal profession has to do with societal changes that have happened in terms of like the nuclear family being spread out as people get older, or communities that might have in the past been centered around a place of worship, or going back centuries or maybe even millennia, hunter gather, well, more than millennia for hunter gatherers, but groups of people who had a clearly defined social pecking order, and as you say, the elders, men or women, who could impart advice and guidance. Do you think that that life coaching is kind of has sprung out of that vacuum?
That's an excellent question. I haven't given that a tremendous amount of thought, but I would say that is a very good. That's a really, I would say, legitimate and realistic picture. That yes, indeed, because there has been that breakdown, that coaching is something that has really that has really kind of risen to the top. And I mean, it's a little bit anecdotal, but I always think, people are like, well, why would you need a coach? Well, look, if you think about it in the most literal sense,
I don't know why they call it hamburger helper. Tastes mighty fine by itself.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
And
the
original Vacation interjection there.
Absolutely. Great movie. So if you think about someone like LeBron James, who I don't talk to every day, but usually on a weekly basis.
Yep.
LeBron was at the top of his game, and yet he still needs a coach, right? The whole team still needs a coach.
Multiple coaches.
Absolutely. But so on the floor, as we see it on TV, right, they do need a coach to help them, right? Even though he's the top of the top. And you're right. And they also have people who help them with their thinking, help them with positive thinking, so on and so forth. And they have multiple coaches on the floor, and then also quote unquote head coaches. So you can really see how it's kind of, with the proper coaching, you can go from wherever you are and hopefully raise that up. And yes, I would say that, right now, 1 in 5 families in the United States is headed by a single parent, and blessings to those single parents doing that work. But that's a pretty high number. So what that means is, hopefully there is another role model, another parental figure outside of that family who can lend coaching, right? Literal coaching, maybe on a team of some sort, but also just somebody who's there as a mentor and a guide, absent an actual formalized coach as I am.
Yeah, I was thinking about in preparation for today that, well, in case listeners didn't realize, you and I are related. It's probably pretty rare that we have two people with the same last name that's so common are related. No, but like growing up, I think you and I both had mentors who we weren't biologically related to. And I certainly remember, Johnny Reben, for example, who, when I was a freshman, I think in high school, he hired me to do some tile work. I didn't know it was a test. It was a test to see if I could do the work, but I worked with him on a Saturday. We start at 7 in the morning. By 10 at night, we're still working, and I'm dead tired. I never worked that hard ever, but I went back on Sunday, and then that turned into a multi-year job. And I mean, $10 an hour back in 1986 was a lot of money, but it actually wasn't about the money. It was about learning from this guy and his wife, Maya. And I know you did too. And just life lessons about everything from how to manage money to how to wear a suit and tie and go to the Japanese steakhouse where you needed to have a jacket, otherwise they would hand you one at the door, like all those things. And I think you and I received mentoring from our parents too, but it's a different dynamic, right? At that age, you're kind of like our parents are never a prophet in their own land, and so we see this other person too, and that's just as a young person, So I'm not debating the importance of coaching at all. I think it's important, and I think successful people in any profession will tell you that they have, even at very, very high levels, they have, thought partners, to use another overly used, cheesy California type of term, or just someone to bounce things off of, right?
Right.
So I think the coaching piece is really an interesting perspective. I want to kind of segue a little bit into kind of what were your biggest surprises coming out of a career in education? You worked in a private school, but education, being a teacher, while every year and every student and every family presents some kind of unique challenges, after a while, it's kind of like, it's like the cycles of it's the seasons in the year, or the innings in a baseball game. Like, seventh inning stretch happens in the seventh inning. This happens then. Like, this is the deal. But then you go into a private practice and you have clients who come from all over for different reasons. They show up, or they're recruited, or someone sends them to you. What was the biggest surprise for you as you segued into this private endeavor?
Yeah, Dave, that's a great question. I think the biggest surprise was that every time a new client walks through the door, although we are all human beings, there are very, very different and disparate needs that client has. And so it's a little bit like doing inner somersaults to be open, present, listening, and also to be able to pull from your experience to guide that individual towards a healthier life in general. So and with the same client, it is not always the same things week after week, right? Something may really be motivating them or inhibiting them one week, and then the next week that's not the focus. So it's a question of sort of building on what you have worked on together, or what you've coached them to work on. I mean, really, the work is really on their part. So that's part of it. And then it's also blending that with the new things that they bring in, and how can you kind of synthesize those together, right? with children in an educational setting, they usually present the same or similar things week after week, month after month, and perhaps even year after year. So you're not really seeing one child doing this and then doing that are very different in the way they present. And so I think that's the biggest surprise that I encountered, was that the same client can show so many different facets of themselves, and really kind of be focused on one thing one week, the next thing the next week. And you have to, of course, find threads that tie those things together So hopefully you can kill many birds with one stone. But that's what I'd say the biggest difference is. And at the same time, that's been the most exciting aspect to my work as well, right? There's really so much that comes toward you, and you receive it, and then you think how you can have it work, or have the client work on what they're sharing with you in order to move things forward.
What about the business side of things? Because when you're a teacher, you're typically, that's not how you're oriented, right?
Right.
Trying to get clients or
Right.
in billing invoices, taxes, staying organized, even down to like what tools you use to take notes if you do, and are you required to keep notes? Like, talk us through all those things.
Great. Excellent question. So I will just, full disclosure, there's been a really big, large learning curve on in those areas that you just mentioned, right? And so that's been something I've had to really work on in order to stay focused. I have a very old school method of note taking, and that is something that I do either during the session and or following the session, between sessions. And then I look back over those notes in order to see where what material we've covered, where we've gone, where else we can go, so on and so forth. And yeah, it's true. You have kind of a ready-made clientele in an educational setting, but now I really have to go out and recruit. And the majority of my clients have come through word of mouth. And that has been wonderful, which means that I'm doing something that is worthy of people talking about and not only trash talking about. So that's a great thing. I'm really grateful for that. But yes, there are so many things out there from a business perspective that one could do in terms of advertising, so on and so forth. And in terms of those things, like I said, there's a steep learning curve, and I'm still working on those. And right now, the majority of my clients are coming from word of mouth, through word of mouth, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I put in a big um, plug for FreshBooks. They're not a sponsor of this show, but maybe they want to. Hint, hint. No, FreshBooks is a super cool, inexpensive way on your cell phone with a super easy platform. You can create invoices. You can track expenses, and for your taxes, it's a pretty powerful tool.
And Dave, the word fresh
Yeah,
used to be pretty cool back in the day. I'd say in the 80s.
the modern version would be called Cool Books.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Fresh. I'm not sure where that is part of the vernacular anymore, but yeah, Fresh was the thing. Um, I always wonder about kind of how it's not only with life coaching, but therapy as well, right? So in some ways, the better the professional is, the better you are at your job, the sooner you work your way out of a client. So I one time had a dentist tell me that if people followed my advice, meaning him as a dentist, he'd go out of business because, floss regularly and get your teeth cleaned every 6 months and don't eat candy and, don't smoke cigarettes and don't chew tobacco and whatever, all these different things. He would basically just be cleaning teeth and that would be it. But people don't follow the advice. And so or, sometimes other things happen, but largely behaviorally based, right? People kind of get lazy, or other things happen. And then of course they got to go to the dentist. So how is that dynamic with life coaching? Like, are you ever sitting there with a client going, wow, I realize that they're doing so well with this plan, they're advancing so well that pretty soon they're not going to need me? And then the second part of that question is, at what point do you tell them, hey, Sarah, or hey, Billy Bob, you probably don't need to come to me every week?
Well, it's funny because Billy Bob, who's
He's right
not
behind you. No.
so that's those Yeah. I mean, so you're right. Here's the thing. It is very challenging to take advice, coaching, and implement it in a consistent way, right? So the chances that I will coach myself out of clientele, the chances are pretty low.
Right.
Um, what I'd say is that, if you do a good job, right, then that client will want to be coached on other things
Right.
because there are many facets of our lives that we could receive coaching on. And it's a little bit like, right, like an objective or relatively objective as much as we can be as human beings, because any relationship is somewhat subjective. It's a relatively objective relationship.
Right.
So I think because of that, there's never that fear. I will say, interestingly enough, 2 weeks ago, I spoke to one of my clients and I said, look, there's no need, excuse me, for you to come every week, in my
Right.
opinion.
Right.
And the client said, but I really, really want to. I know I'm doing well, but I really want to because
Right.
it's going to help me maintain my, progress forward. And I said, okay, great, no problem. But I did posit that as an option, and my client just said, no, I really want to keep going. And I said, fantastic. So that's really interesting. But I think if I may, Dave, I wanted to just quickly like throw this model out at you that
Sure.
Brooke Castillo uses. And so her whole thing is that you have circumstances which are just are, right? Your car breaks down. That's neither good nor bad. Then the circumstances kind of trigger thoughts, right? So your thought about that is um, crap.
Yeah.
And
That's going
then
to cost
that,
$4,000.
exactly. And then that thought um, produces feelings, right? Negative or positive emotions or neutral emotions. And then those feelings generate actions. And then those actions generate a result. So if you can change your thinking about something,
Okay.
then your thinking inform your feelings, inform your actions, inform your results. So that model is something that she uses, and it's something that I utilize as well in large part. And it's really a very, very helpful model. And you can hit any one of those. You can look at your feelings and then work down or up from those. You can look at the results and then work backwards to what your thinking is, and so on and so forth. And the reason I bring that up is because in any situation, right, we can always change our thinking in relation to it, which will then inform our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, and that will produce a different result. So, I mean, honestly, like it's endless what we can do with that. And so if somebody feels like, I'm done, then great, but it hasn't happened yet. And but it's a really, really good question, because even with a therapist, right, you usually feel better after a therapy session, or you realize what you need to work on after a therapy session. And to consistently do that without support and for an extended time period is really challenging.
Have you had to discontinue work with a client, and or even if you haven't, could you imagine a scenario in which you might need to?
Absolutely.
And like why, I guess, would be.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say reasons for that, my work is it's based on relationships. So if someone walks through my door and for some reason they are not relating with to me well, and or vice versa, right? Then we would recognize that. Just as with a therapist, or even with a mechanic, you walk in, you don't like the way they speak to you, whatever, you want to change mechanics. So if someone comes in and they want to have a session, and then they realize, wait a second, Peter's not right for me, no problem. And by the same token, it's the same thing for me. I mean, after all, I am a human being. and I am listening to what they say, working with them. And if I don't feel as though they are invested in helping themselves and
Right.
or taking the coaching advice I'm giving, then I would be forced to really have a pretty clear conversation and say, look, in my professional opinion, this is not working the way it needs to, and I believe you should find a different coach and or therapist, etc.
How much of what role do things like social media um, and people's cell phone usage play in the support they need from you? I mean, it's certainly, and I don't know what age your clients are, but certainly since 2010, approximately, when the iPhone became ubiquitous, and soon after, it's not really the iPhone so much as what the iPhone has on it, the App Store and social media and the algorithms that are designed to keep you on there. We know that it's looking more and more like young people who came of age after 2010 or so, are pretty deeply affected by that. Are you seeing that in your clients, like people coming to you with anxiety or talking about, oh, someone yelled at me the other day, and then you actually find out that they didn't yell at them, it was a all caps post or something? Is that a thing?
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting because I just today recorded and I'm working on the final recordings of a very brief Instagram post about this very issue, which is virtual versus real connection. And what happens is that there's so much conversation, so much communication that can happen between people virtually, right? But that person's not in front of you. They are not feeling your emotions, your warmth, your antipathy, so on and so forth. And so it's very, very disconnected. And then there's them reading into what the message may say, all caps, is somebody yelling or emphasizing, etc. Whereas when you're there with another human being, it's a very different experience. And I have found and I've observed that um, people's ability to interpret and respond to the interactions with other human beings has been compromised. And I think it's like anything, right? You work out, you go to the gym and you're lifting tires and dropping them and whatever, then you get stronger, right? Those are muscles you're using, full body muscles. If you socialize and interact with people and talk with them directly in whatever setting that is, you learn to do that. You learn to read eye movements, so on and so forth. And they also say that, we usually form an opinion uh, within a nanosecond with other human beings. And so we can sort of read somebody and find out whether we like them or not, sympathy, antipathy, so on and so forth. And that happens almost instantaneously. Um, and people are constantly on their phones and they're using those as their mode of communication. And I think the anxiety piece that you brought up is really interesting because we have the ability now to communicate in a way that we've never seen as a society ever, right? There's more communication avenues than ever before. And yet we have some of the highest rates of depression, isolation, antisocial behaviors, unfortunate social ills like increased school shootings, et cetera, et cetera. And these things exist in our lives at a time when we have the ability to communicate more than we ever have before. So I guess my question would be, amidst all this communication, are we actually really meeting other people and really connecting with them, or are we just communicating with them through the tools that we have available to us today?
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you brought up those points because I've just finished reading this amazing book called The Anxious
Oh,
Generation. I don't know
great.
if you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt. I think that's how you say his name, Haidt. Um,
That's right.
I tried to get on the podcast very unsuccessfully because he's super famous, but how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. And he talks about just that very thing, that um, that because especially young people are socializing, in quotations, are socializing electronically and on screens, and because we have by through a number of different um, reactions to beliefs, although they're not backed by reality, but beliefs that the world was so dangerous and that kids would get kidnapped and we can't let our kids walk to the corner store and all those things that oh, and by the way, kids can't play on playgrounds where they're at risk anymore. So I don't know when the last time you saw a playground that had a seesaw or a swing or one of those carousels. They're all padded ground and monkey bars that you would really have to try really hard to get injured on those, right? And so, and we are always intervening on behalf of our kids. And I'm sure you saw that in teaching, and I see it all the time in my job, right? Where two students will have an interaction and they're in a conflict, and then before you know it, now two sets of parents are in a conflict, and they're each advocating for their student. Now they want to fight each other. They want to fight other parents. They want to fight the school. They want to sue. And what we're losing and missing in that is that we've pretty much handicapped those kids from figuring some of their own stuff out. I had an interesting conversation with our mom, about one of our family members. I'm just going to say one of our younger family members who had been involved in something in school, like in middle school or elementary. And my mom was saying, can you believe that they were there at lunch and they were pushed and shoved? And then boy, they turned around and they sucked them and they handled it. Anyway, we were talking through this whole thing. And so I was listening and I was kind of chuckling. And the supposition was that the world on school campuses is just so much more dangerous than it was. And can you believe all that stuff's happening? I'm like, I must have hit it from you really well, Mom, because the number of times that I was in confrontational situations from about kindergarten through, 10th grade, it was something out of like Gladiators or something, right? But we didn't necessarily go tell our parents all the time.
Right.
We figured things out, sometimes more or less effectively, but I think that's something that isn't happening, right? Where kids are not able to, we're not allowing them to exercise those muscles. In Hate's book, I highly recommend this book, even though I don't get a commission. He talks, it's so interesting. There's some data, and I'm going to not be able to find it, but he looks at emergency room. Here we go. Let's see if I can see this. Listen to this. Hospital admissions for unintentional injuries. So in the year 2000, so 24 years ago, for anyone who's reading along and millions of listeners, this is page 183. In the year 2000, so let's call it 25 years ago, just to choose a round number, per 100,000 people in a population, males, age, let's make sure I get this right, age 10 to 19. So you can imagine like fourth grade through high school graduation, right? Males age 10 to 19 were the highest group in terms of incidents per 100,000 population. So 15,000 per 100,000, okay? Admitted for unintentional injuries, right? What you could imagine, the playground kind of stuff 25 years ago. That line now, all population, males, females, different age groups, has decreased dramatically and been more than cut in half over the last 25 years.
Wow.
But that particular group, I don't know if you can see this. So this one here.
Yep. There we go.
A dark line, this dark line here,
Yep.
that dark line and that dark line. This is boys and this is girls in that age group of 10 to 19. They've both gone from the highest risk to the lowest risk of all of them. And so, his conclusion to that is like, screens have taken kids indoors. We're preoccupied and nervous about what happens to them outside, but we're actually not worrying about what happens to them indoors on their screens. But that's just it, right? Is that the ability to fall and get back up and figure things out, that's all going away.
I mean, Dave, that's such an important point, and I can't wait to get my hands on that book. Thank you. And then get Haidt on your podcast at some point. I'll give him a shout out and see if he's willing. But I think that one of the things I actually did, I'm working on a post for that as well. Basically, the whole idea of risk analysis, right? So my the core subject of what I talk about is actually merry-go-rounds, right? Yep. How we used to get on them and fly off them, and they don't exist on playgrounds in this country anymore because of the lawsuits and so on and so forth. And what happens is that's the whole problem is that, right, everything goes indoors, everything is safe, everything is no physical injury, so on and so forth, and then you don't realize how to analyze the risks that exist in the world. And the reality is that there are a lot of risks in the world, but physical and emotional. And you're right, if you're stuck on your phone, the emotional risks skyrocket. Physical risks are reduced drastically. Right. But it all comes down to being able to learn to independently think through whatever you're faced with and make good decisions, right, according to what you perceive and how you govern yourself. So I think another indicator that I've noticed just from my life is that pharmaceutical ads used to only be targeting for a while, they were targeting sort of the elderly, right? People who need medication and so on and so forth in the later part of their lives. Then it really moved to middle age. And now you're starting to see pharmaceutical ads that are targeting teens and even younger, right? So that market has gone from 60, 70, 80-year-olds down to 30, 40, 50-year-olds, down to teens, 20-year-olds, et cetera. And that's just an indicator that it's increasing the market for for pharmaceuticals, but it's also looking at the fact that you're talking about antidepressants for 10, 12-year-olds, whereas that's something back, that really didn't exist in quite the same way when we were growing up. And one more quick point about risk analysis. I mean, you and I were, we were walking a cable that was 4 feet off the ground between two trees. And when you fell on that thing and you didn't fall left or right and you fell with it in between your legs, you learned a lesson fast. And that's why, I'm amazed I have 2 children. But the point is that at that moment, we really hurt ourselves. And we could have, goodness knows, there was no helmet. There was no oversight. Nobody was guiding us. Our parents weren't watching us. They weren't videotaping us. We were out there just working, trying to get across from one side of the cable to the other without hurting ourselves, right? But you learn about the limits, physical limits of your body and balance and so on and so forth. So yeah, those things have really been stripped of children. Luckily, in my educational experience, there were still swings, there were still seesaws, and guess what? Children got hurt quite a bit on all of them. But guess what? They also learned how to navigate subsequently to make sure they didn't get hurt the next time, or they got hurt a lot and finally figured it out. And then they gained confidence from being able to act responsibly and accordingly in the physical world.
Yeah, it's really it's really interesting as you mention those things that, and this isn't a criticism of schools. That's not my purpose. You know, you and I worked for so long in education. I think combined, the two of us have, 60 years of experience or something like that.
That's right.
But it's more like when I think about the forces at play, that kind of compel. Okay, this is what I found this. I'll read this to you in a minute. That kind of compel schools to set up environments also with less and less and less and less risk, less and less and less unpredictable activity, less and less and less disorder, because there's a there's a an efficiency component that dates back to the Industrial Revolution. There's a quiet component, like loud means you're not doing your job. Kids aren't walking in a line means you don't have good classroom management. I'm saying this tongue in cheek. Um, if somebody gets hurt, then a teacher feels vulnerable. I understand that. Is someone going to come and go, what the hell are you doing in your classroom? So as a result, we paint lines on the ground that tell people where to go. We, very rarely let kids do a lot of unstructured play. A lot of recesses are, there are very, very few times that kids are not under direct adult supervision. But this is from Haight's book, page 90. This is from an elementary school in Berkeley. I don't know what year this is, but he must have gone and visited the school, or someone sent him this photo. And this is hanging on a sign, right? Or hanging on a fence rather. It's a vinyl sign, and it says tag rules: include everyone, resolve disagreements with rock, paper, scissors, practice good sportsmanship, one finger touch, no ball tag. If a player doesn't want to play tag, then another player must respect that. Tag games stay outside on the yard. Tag cannot be played in out of bound areas or through other games. When the bell rings, all play stops and students freeze. Then walk to your line. And that's very common. So I'm just going to let that one sit there, right? And then you wonder, if a student had that experience in third or fourth grade, where are they going to be when they're 30? Right? And they're having a disagreement with a spouse, or even just trying to find someone to date, right? Or something at the work where something's not going their way. So I was thinking, are you familiar with the book Atomic Habits?
I haven't read it, but yes, I know it.
I recommend that one too. That's by James Clear, I think is his name. And
Okay.
because as before, when you were mentioning the kind of the setting of goals for clients and coaching them, that may be useful for you, because he kind of takes on our societal urge to try to make massive leaps forward, and they often fail, which is why we keep getting more and more obese, but more and more gyms spring up and they make money, but nobody can stick with it long enough. And so he's got this whole thing where he says, if you tell someone you need to exercise 4 to 5 days a week and you need to do this and limit your calories to 1,800 a day, they never can hang with it, right? But if he says, if you tell someone, for the first week, just stand for 5 extra minutes a day and jot it down. Just stand. That's doable, right? Set your alarm, stand, walk around, go get a cup of coffee and whatever. And then the next week you do it for 10, right? The effects of standing as opposed to sitting on blood pressure and all these other things they're measurable, right? And
Yep.
over time you can build those habits. So it's like the difference between the way that people want to innovate and like go from like, oh, I'm going to build a Tesla truck and it's going to be bulletproof and crossbow proof and have rocket boosters and all this stuff, to, and in a short time, right, just a couple of years, too, like what Toyota did with their manufacturing, that follows the Kaizen Japanese philosophy of small incremental change that builds on it 1% change a year. You do 1% change a year, in 30, 40 years of sticking to it, you have a masterful amount of innovation.
I mean, so Dave, that is, I definitely going to read Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have to say, I mean, you bring up so many great points, and the one that resonates that you just with me the most, you just ended with, is the Kaizen philosophy, because that is something that also in life coaching, right? You're not looking, it's not like, okay, all of a sudden I'm going to go to the gym 7 days a week and I'm going to work out 45 minutes a day. And blah, 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 blah. Of course, you're not going to do that. Of course you're not. And, the, I, this might sound a little bit conspiracy theory oriented, but, the reason so many gyms are popping up and the reason we have an epidemic of obesity and lack of movement is because everybody's trying to make these massive instantaneous gains, right? Or changes. And the whole thing with coaching, I mean, let's just take this for a second. Let's look at the idea of, let's say you look in the mirror at yourself and you think to yourself, I don't like what I see. I am overweight. Okay.
Yeah.
So that thought will then inform your life, and that thought is going to inform your feelings about yourself.
Yeah.
And those feelings will inform your actions, and probably there'll be inactions in this instance. Like, why would I even go to the gym? I'm overweight. I don't feel good about myself anyway. And then you don't get any results, right? And on top, or the results you get are negative emotions and so on and so forth, which, by the way, negative emotions are not a bad thing at all, but in certain contexts, they can really hold us back. Right. So when you look in the mirror, instead of saying, I am heavy, heavier than I want to be, you just tell yourself, I have a body. That's it.
Right.
I have a body. I'm grateful for my body and that I'm alive. So that goes from a negative thought to a neutral thought.
Right.
And that neutral thought then can inform your feelings and so on and so forth down the ladder. And then it can be a whole different ballgame just by changing that initial thought. And so that is what you say of the Kaizen philosophy that Toyota implemented. It's just that, it's this little tweak, and then everything else falls out from there. And you just have to do little things, right? And it makes a big difference. So that is really, really important in terms of coaching as well. I'm not coaching on, okay, so you're not happy with this aspect in your life. Let's totally switch it and do this, because the chances of success are going to be incredibly low. You got to change your thinking first. And that might just go from like self-loathing to some kind of acceptance. And then down the line it goes.
Yeah, it's interesting how what you're saying is not reflected in a lot of what you see online or on social media, TikTok, Instagram, especially a lot of reels and a lot of or YouTube shorts, something that's 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, right? You see someone and they're lifting and they're ripped and they're this and then that. And then there's click this link for more on how to be jacked at age 60 and all this stuff. And and how are you jacked at age 60? Very slowly. And, how do you lose weight? Well, it took years of putting it on. So it's going to take a while.
I mean, and absolutely. You're right, Dave. I mean, even, and so on the opposite end, right? Here's the reality. If you gain 2 pounds a year, which is not a lot, right? I mean, I don't know what that is. Maybe hold two 15-ounce glasses of water one in each hand. Maybe that's equivalent. Okay. So you put on that weight starting at, let's say, 38 when your metabolism starts to slow, or close to 40. So you're just holding those things in water. And then that's what you do the first year. And then the second year, you add the same amount. And even if the rate of weight increase doesn't change, by the time you are 48, right? You are, what is that? Two times, you're 20 pounds heavier. And you're like, what the hell? And so nothing in life is immediate. And I think this notion, especially with the advancement in technology and the exposure to screens, information, so on and so forth, everything that's immediate, that's really hard because we expect everything with immediacy. I mean, I was even thinking about this the other day. I was kind of like, come on, Pete, I was expecting a package and, I'm tracking it and the whole thing. And it's like, it will be delivered prior to 10 p.m. on such and such. And I'm like, oh man, I wanted it when I got home from, when I was done working for the day. Okay. So even that, like, I'm impatient about that. Back in the day, somebody said they sent you something. It may or may not arrive to begin with. And then you didn't know if it was going to be midweek, end of the week, or next week. And so, even that, there was like a built-in patience component that we don't even have anymore. So even we want everything immediately. The other thing I'll quickly say about when we look at reels is that you're right. You look at some jacked 60-year-old. First of all, that 60-year-old has been working their entire lives to be able to be jacked, or they're taking something that the FDA has not approved yet.
Right.
And the other thing about that is that you're not going to present your worst self when you wake up in the morning and you're groggy and your hair's all a mess and you're going to be like, let me put this out into the world. No. So you always put your best foot forward. And then people see that. And it's always oh, wow, that person has this or that. And I will say this, and then I'll pause. But, Brooke Castillo says the following, and she is a woman who I believe last year generated $50 million in income just last year. What I like about Brooke is that she says this: my life is still 50-50 with all this money and success and privilege and ability for influencing others and impacting others. 50% of the time she's struggling and not happy. Yep. And 50% of the time she is happy. And she said it doesn't matter who you are or what station you have in life, income levels, etc. Life is 50-50. And the problem with Instagram Reels is that they're either showing the ills of the world, or they're showing something amazing, beautiful, right? And so you don't see the work behind it, and you don't also get a realistic picture of that person in a situation which is not glorified or trying to make a point.
Yeah, it's now on the topic of Instagram, we are going to link some of your videos in the show notes because they are comedy. If for no other reason, we were definitely going to link some of those.
Thank you.
Yeah, but we're not recommending that people just sit and not relate to each other all day and watch them. Just watch them and then go outside and get on a merry-go-round and try not to sprain your ankle.
Exactly. Thank you.
I just have a couple more questions. You've been really generous with your time, and I really appreciate it. Like if you're looking ahead in 10 years, where do you want to be in terms of your practice, and what are some things you're doing now to try to get there?
It's a great question. I think in a decade hence, I would like to be able to work with larger groups of individuals, kind of in a workshop format, and maybe even earlier than that, to share what I have learned in my life, right? And what I've learned through my life coaching. And because I'm relatively new to formalized life coaching, not new to life coaching as a aspect of my life, I think it's going to take a while for me to be able to provide that service in a meaningful way. And so I'm kind of working on that and thinking about how I can replicate what I'm doing on a little bit of a larger scale. And in the meantime, I do really enjoy working with individual clients. And I really enjoy working one on one in the same space with those clients. It's a very different experience being on the phone. And I have coached over the phone, and I have coached over, using a video platform as well. It is completely different. And there's really no comparison, right? You pick up on the feeling of the other in person, and it's really hard through video. In fact, I actually prefer just the phone over video, because the video can be distracting, even though you can read body movements. You can also determine a lot through tone of voice, um, cadence of speech, etc., on the phone. So I would like to be able to serve more people on a little bit of a larger level down the road, um, and that's something that I really look forward to achieving.
Where can people find you? I mean, your online platforms, and where do they go to find you?
Thank you. So I have two Instagram platforms. One is Peter underscore the coach, and that is really content that is aimed at. I believe my story there is just for fun.
Right.
And I'm kind of poking fun at myself and just human beings in general. And I really enjoyed creating content for that. The other one, which is soon to be um, housing or holding quite a bit of content that I've been working on now for weeks, is called Chamiso Life Coaching. That's it.
Okay.
And then I can also be found at peter@chamisolifecoaching.com. Um, and yeah, those are the ways to find me. And I'm really excited um, because people are starting to appreciate what I'm trying to bring a little bit of humor to the life coaching profession. It is a very serious one, and I just want to say I have to be careful, and my intention is really only to kind of provide laughter, and I'm poking fun oftentimes at myself. And the reason for that is that, having worked in education, I know statistically through Google, and I also know through my experience that children laugh, I don't know, by a factor of 7 times more than adults do. Laughter is just something that emanates from them. And as adults, right, we're burdened by so many aspects of life, and we don't laugh enough. And so I'm really trying to bring that laughter to people, and at the same time, through Peter underscore the coach, and then also Chamiso Life Coaching, my other Instagram platform, is really aimed at providing content, particularly for parents, but really for anybody. But it is geared toward parents in order for them to be able to consider some of the things, especially in this information age that we are trying so desperately to navigate in order to bring health and joy to our children and future generations.
Yeah, thank you so much for those. And I think it's appropriate to end our conversation on that topic of the power of the sense of humor. We're in an interesting time where the role of a comedian is oftentimes a controversial one, politicized, banned or not banned, or which side you're on. And so, the role of a court jester historically was a pretty important one. And it was really the person who could point or poke fun at the king without losing their head. And we have that tradition today where the president, for example, hosts a roast every year, that the press corps roasts the president, right? So those are kind of things, but even just poking fun at selves and kind of bringing some levity into things. And so I appreciate, I think your videos are hysterical. So we're going to try to get those out there. You get the last word today before we end. So is there any last piece of information or thought or wisdom that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, David. I mean, this has been a wonderful, wonderful moments to share with you this time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I've learned a lot already. I guess I would say we need to embrace both aspects of ourselves, kind of the dark and the light, as it were, and know that we are fallible human beings. And yet we also learn from our foibles. And then we take those and we kind of shine light on them or bring light into the world because of them. And again, life, I don't know if it's 50-50, but I think it's pretty darn close. And I believe that one of the most powerful things we can give ourselves is forgiveness and understanding for the things that we don't do and should have, or the things that we did and feel that we should not have. And that is that notion of looking at ourselves, trying to improve, and truly giving ourselves forgiveness, I think, is very, very important. And I don't think that is something that you were talking before that is recognized as important in our culture necessarily. You were talking before about lines and in school and structure and don't talk out and be quiet and so on and so forth. And so many people have so much within themselves that they would like to share and get out there, and they express it differently. And so we have to be flexible inwardly to welcome all of the different people, the ways people interact with each other, with themselves. And we have to understand that that's just kind of the human condition. And the human condition is something that that we all share and should really be celebrated. And I think ultimately life boils down to intention, right? Whatever the final result is, what was our intent? Were we trying to bring joy, goodness into the world, or were we trying to harm and slander others, right? And I think that's really an important element in this, and also the idea of transformation, right? We're all trying to get better, or we should be, and transform ourselves.
Thank you so much, Pete. It's been great chatting with you, and we'll have to do this again soon.
Thank you, David. It's such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayal for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day.